Welcome to the Brew Knowledge Podcast, brought to you by Brewlogix. There's a lot of experimentation in the beer industry to innovate the next great beer. But there's one area where we ought to play it safe to avoid any negative repercussions. Our next guest has made her career helping breweries navigate the legal landscape of craft beer. But first, Dan had another great question.
Today, we get to keep it kind of fun. The topic is law. We're getting ready to speak with a fantastic lawyer attorney that's in the practice for craft beer. And since we don't know anything about law, we don't practice law. Us three, we just are really good at drinking beer and knowing the industry. We're going to keep it fun. So what I wanted to do is ask you guys, you've been in the industry quite a long time, and I'm going to give an example, and then I just kind of want to hear some fun examples of laws that might just be crazy that got changed that you guys experienced, or some interesting angles where maybe law was involved. And we're not calling anybody out here. We're just speaking, we'll call it hearsay per se for legal purposes. But one of the things that here in my great state of Indiana, when craft beer started coming up, there was a law where you had to serve food, right? If you wanted to serve on premise, you had to serve food. And so one of the local breweries here, to kind of mitigate that law, they brought in Hot Pockets, and they sold Hot Pockets over the counter. I don't even know if they had a microwave that you could heat the things up with. But that was their way of bypassing that law, which I thought, it's the ingenious, it's the American spirit to find a way to get things done. So I'm going to lead off with that. Jeremy, you got a smile on your face, so I know you got a story up your sleeve. So
No,
just love to hear what the. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I'm just like, I have this image of like you order a Hot Pocket and they hand over a frozen Hot Pocket. So that's for you for later.
Keep it under your armpit. It'll warm it up. I don't know what they're
Just stick
doing.
it on your engine block. It'll be ready in an hour.
So, I mean, Jeremy, I'm gonna start with you. Do you have any, weird things that you've experienced over your years in the industry that you want to have fun
Well,
with?
and they're, working in the industry, especially coming up, you learn that you see other advertisements on TV or billboards, and you think, oh, I've got a great idea for an ad for our brewery and our beer and blah blah, and then someone says, yeah, we can't do that, and so uh, it really is important that you know the laws, you have someone who can advise you appropriately, you have the laws. But there are some just kind of situations where like, oh man, that would have been great if we could do this. And we've all heard of some of those places that have really pushed the boundary or took the risk. um, I think I have one of those stories too. When I lived in Oregon, you had to serve food, and so I knew the brewer at this brewery on the way back from actually wine tasting, and we're like, we got to go to brewery now. We stopped to have lunch, and we walk in there, and they just basically had like Costco-sized bags of like chips and cheese puffs, whatever, that you could like fill a little bowl, and it was going to cost this much, and so technically fulfilled the law. But you're like, so no lunch then, huh? I would have loved
So,
a Hot Pocket at that point, but they did just the bare minimum to satisfy the law, and then they could just get back to what they did. That and there are ones, and I won't call out names, but there are uh, a brewery in the northern part of the U.S. and a brewery in the southern part of the U.S. that have a beer with the same name, and I never quite understood how that got through the decision makers and the legal bean counters, because I don't think that their territory overlaps with each other, but it's not common and doesn't happen to have
no.
beers with the same name. I mean, there's usually some thing, so it's just kind of interesting to see how that happens. And then we have the three tiers are a law, but then you have this mega brewery that owns a distributor, and this distributor that owns and so there's a lot of overlap that I don't understand. And I really would look forward to talking with our guest to get some more insight in that.
Yeah. Yeah. One thing just to touch on your story about going in and finding the Costco size of cheese balls. We should have had the Brewery DB app up back then for you, where you can just filter by a full service menu versus just the snacks and apps,
Uh,
man. We were too early, I guess.
well,
So
it would have saved me
we're on it now.
so much heartache, headache, and time to say, I'll visit that brewery another time because we were looking for lunch, not really beer. I was just advocating for beer. And so that Brewery DB app would have really, really helped out.
I love it. Josh, got any good ones up your sleeve here?
Yeah, I think the fun thing with brewers is they're typically known for their ingenuity, whether it's ingenuity in creating equipment, ingenuity in artistry and making beers, or creative escapes around laws, legal esque. So obviously, Dan said at the beginning, we are not lawyers. I'm not advocating to circumvent your laws by any means, but yeah, I think about the days where, it used to be as easy as like, oh, a bar or restaurant doesn't have a available tap. Oh, cool. I'll drill one in for you and you're ready to go. Now I got a dedicated
Just get
line.
it done.
And now there's laws on what can be provided to accounts, which again has value. Me coming from Texas, I remember it was illegal for breweries to sell you a pint of beer. What they did is they sold you a tour for the cost of a pint of beer, and you did a little 30-second tour, and then you went and enjoyed your free beer for the cost of a tour. So I think there's a lot of different ways that you get around. I think for me, it's always interesting to see, what is the purpose of a law? Sometimes they are kind of goofy. I know anybody who's listening who has to deal with their alcohol beverage control, which are great people, really appreciate the work they're doing. But sometimes the way the laws are written don't make sense to anybody. So, I would encourage anybody who finds themselves in a situation where there is a law that doesn't make sense, rather than thinking about how can we circumvent it. Let's all come together, work with our guilds, work with each other to kind of see if we can go change it. I know one of the things that I always chuckle about now that I live here in Indiana is going to the grocery store, not being able to buy cold beer. It's like, that's a crazy thing. I can buy a bottle of vodka, but I can't get a cold 6-pack. And then right there's cold bottles of wine. So, again, one of those laws that I find goofy, but nonetheless exists. And all we can do is try to change it or go somewhere else.
Yeah. There's one more thing, if I
Totally.
can add real quick, that
Yeah.
you triggered a thought. So when you have state laws, that is, you have to follow those. But and this is important for consumers to realize too, that you can also have house rules that are even more strict than the state law if and when appropriate. And so if you walk into a place and the rules are a little bit different, just understand that they are doing something that is important and worthwhile for them. And as a consumer, you may not understand it. So either ask the question or just let it go and go have a drink. But there are different levels of laws and rules, and just be cool.
Totally. I think you guys both hit on a good point there. One, guilds are out there doing a lot of great work to
Mm.
move the old laws that were put in place for great reasons back in the day, but they just need to be updated, right? So definitely support your guilds. We support a few of them as well here at Brewlogix. And then I think as well, like, have some grace when you travel. You don't know the local laws, right? So, if you can't, to Josh's point, you come to Indiana and you can't find cold beer in a grocery store, but you can find cold wine. Don't know, it's not just because we're trying to disgrace beer here. Just it's the state law, right? So just have grace as you go out into your travels, and don't blame the messenger, right? That's the old saying that I like to go with. So this is a fun little thing. I like this. Again, there is a disclaimer here. We are not lawyers and attorneys, and we're not trying
We
to
don't even play them on TV.
exploit anybody.
But we
Not
do have
even.
a friend who knows quite a bit about it. So
Yes.
We do
hopefully
have a
we'll all be
friend.
able to learn and have her on speed
Yes,
dial.
we know, Gal.
Yes, we do. You guys are about to hear from her. So, gentlemen, thank you so much, and look forward to seeing you soon.
Right on.
Cheers.
The Brewlogix craft beverage community drives on-premise profitability through our unified technology platforms. Go to brewlogix.com to get started. And now, our interview with craft beer attorney and co-founder of Starter Brewery, Candace Moon. Welcome back to the Brew Knowledge Podcast, everyone. I'm Jeremy Storton. I'm your host, and I'm an advanced Cicerone.
I'm Dan Hornbrook, Director of Customer Journey here at Brewlogix.
Today, so I'm going to ask everyone, if you're watching or listening, I want you to make sure sit up straight because we have a lawyer in the building. And
Guess I should stop straight
and
then.
and and as we were just discussing before we went live, that the lawyers are keen to argue and fight, but not this lawyer. Not this lawyer. She's here to help make your life better, especially in the beer world. My guest is Candace Moon. She's the founder of the Craft Beer Attorney. She is the Craft Beer Attorney and has worked with hundreds and hundreds of craft breweries around the nation. She is also the co-founder with a previous guest for Start a Brewery, just a wealth of knowledge for anyone who's trying to get this thing started. We have this reservoir of information that you need to know as you get going. And she helped co-found that. And she's also an instructor at the San Diego State University Beer Certificate Program. Candace, what did I leave out?
Oh, Lord. Those are the big
Okay,
points.
Lord
Those are the
Candace.
big points.
Lord Candace.
No, I didn't mean that. I feel like in 15 years, there's a lot that's out there, but those are by far the big points for sure.
Those are the big points. And of course, anyone who does want to connect with you afterwards, we'll send them your way. But this is who we're talking to. And this is how, for those of you who find a benefit in getting, the other comment we made before we started is not everyone in the beer industry is also equally savvy in law. There are a number that, as Candace pointed out, at least 4 that we're aware of, but that's not everyone. And so there are certain things that for those of you who own a tap room, starting a brewery, whatever it may be, there's things that you need to know so that your life doesn't get immensely worse very quickly. So let's kick it off. Dan, take it away.
Yeah, welcome, Candace. Thanks for being here. And so to kick it off, really, right now we're talking a lot about the craft industry and the growth that it's having, and we're seeing a lot of breweries that may be small, they might be even young in age of how long they've been open. But as breweries grow and as breweries expand, really, we see a lot of expansion into hospitality environments nowadays. What are some just common things that those younger ones, the ones that are expanding, what should they look out for, legal wise, as they grow and expand, kind of into this new kind of moment in craft industry?
Well, I do think, and this is a very popular topic and has been for years, but trademarks get more and more important, especially as you start to expand. Because if you haven't, registered or filed for any trademarks before you start expanding, that's when you may find that you enter a market where someone else has a beer name that is one of your beer names. And that can be a very difficult situation, especially because whoever used it first basically will own that name in that area. And so you may have to change some of your beer names. And if it's your flagship, that, isn't necessarily going to be a lot of fun for you. And which also would involve changing labels. And God forbid you printed a gazillion cans that are already printed. So there's a lot of moving parts. I'd say the other really big piece that a lot of people don't realize is that every state has its own license, paperwork, compliance requirements that you as a brewery, even if you're using a distributor. So, and first of all, you have to use a distributor in almost every other state. You can't just sell to retailers in other states. You have to have a distributor. You, in most cases, have to have a distributor contract to be able to sell into that state. And you will have to do a whole bunch of paperwork and jump through hoops in those other states. And I think a lot of people don't realize not how difficult, but how many hoops there are to jump through to start selling in another state. I find that a lot, especially because they're like, hey, I've got a distributor interested. We want to sell next month. And I'm like, well, depending what state you want to go into, it may take longer than a month to get the paperwork you need filed and approved and processed on the state's end to be ready to sell in a month. That's actually would be pretty unusual. And again, it's all the state paperwork,
Yeah.
There's a lot of planning and research that goes into that people shouldn't just jump at it. Yeah.
There should be.
There should be, because none of this stuff, anytime you're dealing with the government, they do not turn on a dime. And most of the time, you cannot pay them more money to expedite. You can't pay them to make it go faster. It goes as long as it goes. So the more you can plan and prepare and know, because some states, you're going to have to register to do business in that state, register your entity as a foreign entity, which means you'll have to get an agent in that state, then register with the state, which that can take a couple of months. Then you can start the application to sell your alcohol in that state. And again, you're just trying to sell to a distributor. So you're not even trying to sell to their citizens, but there's still hoops you have to jump through. And then you've got to do monthly filings generally of what you're sending to that state. They expect to see monthly reports. And again, it's just a lot of compliance, and none of it's hard. It's just time consuming and nitpicky detail to remember to do all these things. I think those are kind of the big issues.
If we were trying to plan, if Dan and I had Bald Man Brewing and we were trying to get into a new state, I mean, would the timeline be, would you say like we should plan on a year, 6 months?
I mean, I'd say 6 months is more than adequate. I mean, there aren't states that take it. There are states that might take a year if you are getting a license in that state. So if you're in that state trying to be a manufacturer or wholesaler, some of those licenses do take a really long time. You're just trying to do the paperwork to be able to sell into the state. I think you want to give yourself 6 months, as I'd say that's probably theoretically the longest it should take between if you have to register with the state and register with the alcohol agency. And then some states you're registering with the locality. I mean, every state's different, which also makes it very difficult. So to be able to do all the things that need to get done, you need to know what those things are. And that's not always very easy to find out.
Yeah. Well, I wonder, Dan brought up, the new brewery, for example. Do you have any experience with breweries who are fairly established, who have been quote unquote under the radar for a while, and they realize that, this may not serve us in the long run? What are some of the legal issues for breweries like that you've encountered that you would strongly advise against?
Well, I mean, again, that's where trademarks kind of come into play.
Trademark? Okay.
As well, I recently, and this, it's funny, I've been talking a lot about compliance lately because I keep running into issues with people who have compliance issues. And it's one of those things that like either they didn't realize in the beginning they were supposed to do something, or they forgot, and then it just kind of got by the wayside, or the person who used to do it left the company and it never got picked up on. So for example, I tried to make an amendment to a client's TTB license, and we did all the things that need to be done. And today I got an email saying, oh, we did a tax compliance audit on this account. And here are basically 2 pages of forms that have not been filed. And it's like 2 years of reports,
Oh my goodness.
of manufacturing reports that were not filed, that is now going to hold up this change they're trying to make. So we got to go back and clean everything up. And again, I mean, it's, and
so ignorance is not bliss in this regard.
Ignorance is definitely not bliss, because
It catches up.
It will catch up. And especially if especially if it's the government and money is owed, because you are going to be paying interest and you might be paying penalties. Like, that's not one where they're like, oh, it's okay, you didn't know. Well, no. This is, yeah.
We may take our time, but you owe us now.
They want their money. It's kind of understandable, but
yeah, understood.
But it is, and it's one of those things I tell people, actually, every time I teach my startup classes, like, this is a highly regulated industry. There are lots and lots of things you need to know that need to get done. And if you're not doing it, you need to make sure someone else is doing it, but someone's got to stay on top of that.
Yeah. It seems to, like what you just said, if someone leaves your organization that's in charge of some of this, there could be some balls that are dropped, right? And along the way, like, I think that goes into key is like hiring the right people from the get-go. Hopefully they stick around, and people do change and this and that, but also managing those files and managing those processes and permits and all those things in a singular place, a place of truth that you can get to no matter who's there, or who leaves, or who comes and goes, kind of thing. So I didn't even think about that angle as far as losing people and losing track of 2 years worth of compliance stuff. That's tough.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
for sure.
think about that too with your sales reps. If you lose a sale, and this is one of the reasons, like we always recommend, provide your sales reps, make them use a company phone, make them use a company laptop, because when they leave and they give you that back, you retain all that information and those contacts, as opposed to it
Yes.
leaving with the sales rep who leaves. Because obviously sales reps move around quite a bit, I think, in
Yeah.
any
Yeah.
industry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
So going back, you've been in the industry for a while. COVID really disrupted the industry. Um, Really, from an on-premise, really a whole lot. It disrupted that part of the industry for sure. Has there been a lot of fallout, since then? But also, has there been any growth that maybe has, sprouted out of that moment in time?
Ugh. I mean, there's definitely been a lot of fallout. And the funny thing about that is I remember vividly prior to COVID at all the conferences and all the speaking, everybody talked about, and it is true, you make more money for what you sell over your bar. And so you had
Yeah.
a lot of people who had a, business model of just a tap room and selling over the bar. And so when COVID hit, I mean, unless you had access to a canning line or, could kind of crank out those crowlers for people to be able to come and pick up, it really hurt a lot of people. And I also think that the government did a lot of great things to help, people like, hey, you don't have to pay your rent, you can have these, hold-offs that are, of course, all now coming due. And I think I'm seeing a lot of closures, I think, because I think there's a couple of things coming out of COVID is all the kind of things that you were given leeway on. Now landlords want their back rent. The government wants you to repay those loans. Um,
Right.
and on top of that, and kind of the stress and the struggle of that, I think you have the fact that the on-premise business has not bounced back. People aren't going out. And I'll be honest with you, I'm probably one of those people. Like, I was stuck at home for 3 years. Now I'm kind of in the habit of just being home. Like I have to think about making an effort to go out again. Um, and then on top
Just
of that,
just
I
taking
think
off
you
my
had,
slippers is a big deal.
can I wear my slippers out? Is that okay? But I also think too that a lot of people got burned out during COVID, especially employees and what they dealt with. Um, I mean, just in general, kind of the divisiveness of the country. I mean, you had employees who were forced to work who kind of wanted to stay home and shelter, dealing with people who were wanted to go out if they wanted to and pissed that they had to wear a mask. I mean, like
Mhm.
you just had a lot of people, butting heads and not a lot of people having choice, or the freedom to choose what they want to do. And I think there was a ton of burnout. So now the employee pool is a little more
It's
difficult as
interesting
well.
right now. Yeah, it's
I
Yeah.
think
interesting right
there's
now.
just a lot of different things, at play, and it's a different business. And now we have all the other beverages, all the RTD cocktails, all the seltzers. Everybody's kind of coming out with something new. A lot
It's
of brand
uh
owners.
it's interesting. It was what we consider like the craft beer industry, and now it's the craft beverage industry because it has
Exactly.
expanded so much. And talking about your experience of you don't go out like you did. I'm the same way. I kind of grew out of going to the bars and this and that and in my part of my life, and that's the challenge that I've seen with a lot of these craft breweries is they have to give people a reason to come to their place now. And even if it's a small, we talked to Laura Lodge about events. It doesn't have to be a large scale event, but again, we have to give people reasons to come back out, invite them back into your place. And so it is a larger effort nowadays. Like people used to just show up to your tap room, right? And now you have to come up with an event or a special or something to give them a reason to come visit your
Mhm.
place. So interesting
I also
fallout for
think
sure.
Agreed. I also think, and this is, I guess, more pertaining to like myself and some of my friends, and maybe even you, but like I'm older now. I can't drink those high ABV beers like I used to, and I don't really want to. Like I would love to go out and have a couple of low ABV beers. I
Yeah.
actually drink a lot of NA beer now. Now that we
Mhm.
have some like actually tasty options, and I think that that customer that was coming frequently and regularly 5 to 10 years ago has grown up. And so what are they looking for? They're looking for the same thing. So you've either got to
So
like appeal to bring those people back, or have whatever is appealing to the younger demographic now, which I think is the variety of options of beverages.
to lean in real quick on the NA side of things. From a legal standpoint, people think that NA means you can sell it anywhere, and because it doesn't have alcohol, but most of it has 0.5%. I think that's the legal limit to be considered an NA. Correct me if I'm wrong there. But what is some of the nuance around that? I've seen some NAs sold DTC online, direct to consumer there. Like, what is some interesting things around the NA category right now as that continues to expand?
And it's interesting. I don't have a lot of experience with on the professional side, simply because, at least in California, yeah, anyone can sell it, and it can be sold anywhere because it is non-alcoholic. Like, so even though it's that 0.5 level, that is legally FDA, TTB, like that's not
Okay.
alcohol. And
Okay.
really, it's funny because in some of these NA forums, because I've joined just to kind of, it's interesting to hear about beers and stuff. Is like, you have the people who are recovering alcoholics who are really pissed because they didn't know it had 0.5 and concerned validly.
Mhm.
But that's because, like, legally that's not considered alcohol. So it's anything that you buy, like, it's like getting tiramisu for dessert. It's like,
Yeah.
it's not considered alcoholic, but it does have alcohol in it. And depending on how strong the chef made it, who knows. Um but so now here's the thing though. If when you so there's multiple ways, and I think most of the time now, the process, it never becomes more than 0.5%. If you never cross that threshold, it's never alcohol, and you don't need any licenses any alcohol licenses to make it or sell it. Then you're
Right.
just selling the food item. You're dealing with health department, FDA. If you're removing so let's say it becomes alcohol, and then you remove the alcohol to make it NA, then you do have to have a brewing license to produce it. So pretty much at any point, if you are making alcohol, even if you take it out later, you have to have the license to brew it. But then anyone can sell it.
Once it's
Interesting.
packaged
Yeah.
Once it's had that
yeah.
alcohol removed, yeah.
Well, and I would imagine that is
Or,
dependent
and I
state
should
to
say in
state.
California. I was about to
Yeah,
say.
because I live in Idaho, and don't quote me on this, but my latest best knowledge is, if I were to go to this particular NA brewery's webpage and say, "Ooh, I want to order these beers," they can't ship it to Idaho because I haven't read the law, but probably because it at once upon a time it may or may not have been alcohol, so we can't ship it. But I can still get it in the stores, but I can't get their specialty stuff. And so that's one of those things where we need to talk to the legislature about
Yeah.
what are we doing here, folks?
Well, and again, too, I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of, anytime there's a new beverage, there's confusion, misunderstandings, people don't exactly know, and then it may or may not even fit into current definitions of what. So like kombucha, you have to have a beer license, but it's not beer, but it's not, it doesn't fall into, it doesn't automatically fall, it's not beer, wine, or spirits. It's some sort of weird variation, and the TTB goes, okay, we're gonna stick it here. And
But
then
it's
every
another
state kind of
revenue
decides,
source for the government.
right. And it is alcoholic. And then of course,
Yeah.
your state figures out how are they going to categorize it. And then you have things like in California, sake is considered wine by the state, but it's spirits by the feds, or vice versa. I can't remember, but like, so you got to have like different, like, it's complicated. I don't have any sake clients partly for that reason. Like, I don't want to learn that yet. I got enough going on. But
Interesting.
yeah.
Well, we were just talking a minute ago, and and we got this really interesting question. I'm glad you asked it, Dan, about the NA stuff. But before we got on that little thread, we were talking about a lot of our guests in the previous Brew Knowledge podcast. We talked about being family friendly, having a well trained staff, creating events, all these things to make your place
more conducive to bring people out of their house, to get them out of their slippers, to come to their place and drink their beer and eat their food. I can't even wrap my head around this, but what are some of the legal implications that may occur in that regard? Are there any? Are there none? What do we need to think about when it comes to the legal side of things?
Oh, so you mean in terms of
Creating
the
events,
legality of the things
making.
you're trying to do
Yeah, I mean,
to bring people in?
I've
Yeah.
heard of some people like having their 10-year-old birthday party at the brewery. Of course, the 10-year-olds aren't drinking beer; they're drinking the root beer or whatever. But the parents are having a pint or two. Are what's what should taproom brewery owners, managers, whatever, think about when they think, "Hey, let's get more people to come in"? Is there a
Okay.
downside?
Well, no, I wouldn't say there's a downside, but I do think so. It's kind of similar to when you get marketing people in the alcohol industry who don't come from the alcohol industry, and they have
Okay.
8,000 ideas of how to market alcohol, and we should do this and do that. That like, okay, you can't do that. You can't do that. So there's nothing wrong with it, and you certainly want to be as creative as you can, but there will be and then again, I'm in California, so but some states the locality is involved. In California, we're just the state, but the state, has its district offices there. But there are things you can and can't do, and there's a lot of nuances to that, and there's a lot of semantics. So you can't buy one get one free, but you can pay. Okay, buy a beer, get a free pint glass. But you
Okay.
can buy a beer and included in the price is a pint glass. So operationally the same thing.
Yeah.
Semantically, the way you advertise it is different. So
Very
that's
interesting.
what you really have to watch out for doing any kind of marketing for alcohol is the semantics. And again, and there's every state's different. Plus, the feds have their own, and they're definitely watching. I've definitely had TTB, some of my larger brands, they look at Instagram, they look and see what people are doing and what they're saying and what they're, putting out there. So you've got to be very careful. And same with events and how you do those events. And that's all going to depend on your state law. So let's put it this way. I would say, especially if you're starting to look at different things and do different things, I would make sure you are either have a really good relationship with your local alcohol, either district office or a compliance person, if you can run those things by to say, hey, can I do this?
I love it.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah, I
Or
was
how
thinking,
can I do this?
we can't really advertise a jumpy house every Saturday and show an image of a bunch of adults holding a beer in a jumpy house, or hey, a dollar beer from 3 to 3:15 on Fridays in the afternoon or something like that. And I do remember coming up with a lot of great ideas within the team when I worked at breweries that like, oh, let's put a pin on that one.
Well, yeah, and I think too, and I'm sure probably some of your other guests mentioned this too, but like, so when doing events, I think you kind of also still want to stay in the wheelhouse of your brand.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, so kind of the hip urban brewery might not want to have a family focus of, oh, I'm sorry. Well, okay, a 10-year-old's birthday party at the brewery. That's probably going to piss off all the
Yeah.
other customers. I mean, you kind of want to,
Yes.
who is it
All
you're
the dog
going
owners.
for, and yeah, and how do you, appeal to those people? And I
Yeah.
think there's
Yeah.
lots of ways to do that, but yeah, you just want to make sure you're being compliant. And the way you get in
Candace,
trouble, at least in California, by the way, is not by the ABC is not looking for these things. It's either your competitors or someone you've pissed off that turns you in, or more likely than that, even is someone else who thinks like, oh, I want to do that, and we'll call it, ABC and go, hey, I want to do this, and they're like, you can't, and then they're like, well, so and so did, and
mm,
not in a reporting kind of way, but in a, and that's how a lot of investigations happen. So don't assume that because someone else did something that it is actually compliant. You want to verify it before you jump into it.
and don't rat out the other brewery.
Well, and yeah, I mean,
I-
if you call and ask and they say you can't
Well,
do it, don't tell them why you are asking.
yeah,
Kind of, and
exactly.
you know,
fair enough.
So question for you. I just saw this maybe the past couple of months through the CCBA. I think they released something, and it's something that we went through with our websites.
Oh, I know where you're going.
ADA compliance,
88.
and
Yep.
in the wild west of the people that are out hunting down websites to make a little cash off of it. There's from what I understand, there's no cap to what you can sue a company for their website not being compliant. And I think that, as younger breweries and younger organizations, businesses all around, can you speak to a little bit of like the danger of not making sure your website is ADA compliant?
Okay, so it's very, very similar to a number of years ago when physical locations were not ADA compliant. You didn't have the handicap ramp. And so someone who's in a wheelchair would show up, they can't get in, they go file a lawsuit. It's just like that, except now it's your website, especially, and this is only if you have a physical location, which I'm not 100% sure I understand the logic of that. But if you have a physical location, your website has to be compliant. And there are ways to do this from the web design world that I'm definitely not my forte. But so that basically when someone who is, their eyesight's impaired, they log on, they would, instead of seeing pictures, they're going to hear descriptions of the pictures, and vice versa.
Right.
Someone who's hearing impaired is going to see written text instead of sound that is played on your website. So there are minimum requirements your website is supposed to meet, which I would say that most of us don't actually understand what those are. And I say most of us as in small business owners, nor can we afford to pay a web designer as I believe you're looking at approximately like $30,000 to make it to the ADA compliance. So my recommendation, actually the number one recommendation I would have, and this only counts if no one has come to you yet. If you've already gotten the letter or the lawsuit, different story. But if you have not gotten the letter yet, and it sounds horrible to say this, but take down your website. Just don't have a website. I mean, unless
It's scary.
unless you are selling off your website, let's say you have a good reason. But if your website's just to like provide information, take it down. Use Facebook, use Instagram, let that be your method of communication, and just get rid of your website.
Mark on my brewery.
That is perfect
Wow.
protection.
Yeah.
Now that said, a lot of people are selling things such as merch on their websites and may not want to do that, which I totally understand. And what you then do want to do is find a web designer, a company that will help modify your website to, and what I'll say is like the maximum that you can afford to pay to get it as close to the minimum. So I'm not saying you have to spend $30,000, but you'll want to do as much as you possibly can to make it accessible.
Can you at least show an attempt at good faith as a form of lawsuit prevention?
I would like to think so. I'm not
Okay.
100% sure. Well, let's put it this way. The thing is the people going after these, they don't really care. They're going after low-hanging fruit. This is a statutory requirement not being met. And every time the sight or hearing impaired person goes to the website and can't access it, then every time they do it, that's another instance that you're going to get fined for. And it is a statutory number. It is, as Dan was saying, no maximum. But at the same time, like these are, I'd say 99% of the time is not I'm an impaired user who I really want to go on this website and I can't, and I'm really upset about this, so I'm filing a lawsuit. This is one law firm who I believe has, plaintiffs, I think, professional plaintiffs.
Yeah.
And they send them, go out there and look for stuff.
Taking a legitimate issue and turning it into an ambulance chaser situation, right?
Yeah, exactly. So good faith is only going to get you so far. I think you need to have at least, made steps to make improvements. You want to show that it's not more like I tried to get it there, but I couldn't. It was more like, okay, here's what we did. We contacted this firm and this is the work that was put in. And if you can't afford to do it, just take it down. Yeah. But again, once you've gotten the letter or the threat of the lawsuit, you're kind of beyond that that measure, unfortunately. And by the way, if you do get a letter about a lawsuit, don't ignore it.
Yeah.
Because I mean, basically ignoring a lawsuit, you basically lose by default by not showing up. So
as we stated earlier, it doesn't go away.
unfortunately, it does
still
not
there.
go away. Yeah.
So it's I think that's something that I'm glad you touched on a lot of that and gave some options there. I think that I just don't want to see anybody get, sideswiped from, they're focused on goals of growing their business, and then all of a sudden they get sideswiped. And so thank you for some shedding some light on that, and hopefully people can protect themselves moving forward. So
Yeah.
Other than that, thank you so much for coming, Candace. I know there's plenty more that we can ask you about, but I'll just but for anyone who's interested, well, this is just this is just a little taste of what Candace can do for you. And if you want to learn more, then we can go to Start a Brewery LLC. Where else could people find you?
So startabrewery.com. Although you'll probably get Laura before me. She really takes the lead on that one, thank God. But you can find me at craftbeerattorney.com. Pretty easy.
Great. If you get one of those letters, or if you have more questions, call Candace, and she and her team will sort through the muck and the mess. But thank you so much for being here and sharing your knowledge, your expertise, and cheers.
Oh, thanks you for
Candace.
having me. Thank you.
The advice on this show is obviously not a one-size-fits-all solution. The goal is to provide ideas that will either work for you or stimulate other ideas on how you can improve your business. We hope these conversations were helpful, but let us know what works well for you. Until next time, cheers.